There was a period in my life where my parents were going through a rough patch. I lived alone in a small apartment and took my 6-year-old brother in while my parents figured out their situation. I was lucky enough to work from home, so watching my little brother wasn't too much of a burden, and it made me feel a lot better to have him there with me. My parents had a history of bad arguments, and I didn't want him to experience that harshness while growing up. During this short 2-month time period, 2 weeks in, my job scheduled an in-person meeting to be held during the second half of our workday on a Friday afternoon. This was a normal monthly meeting that we had to discuss our progress on projects. With my brother being so young, he, of course, needed a babysitter to watch him while I was gone. I called a local babysitting service that I found online and got it scheduled. I didn't choose a specific person. I just let them give me whoever was available at the time. Come Friday, I got my little brother ready and made sure everything was set on the counter for the babysitter. At noon, the babysitter, who I'll call Chris, came to the door of the apartment building. I buzzed him in and showed him inside. He looked to be between 18 and 20 years old, and from the few minutes I met with him before I left, he seemed to be very caring and nice, just like any babysitter should be. I thanked him for helping me out and left for the meeting. The meeting took a few hours, and by 5:30, I was heading back home. In-person meetings always drained me because I was so used to working from home, so the drive back felt long and tiring. I parked by the front of the building and headed inside, then walked upstairs to my room. I unlocked the door, and immediately something felt wrong. The lights were all off, and it was really quiet. "Chris?" I called out in the doorway. I stepped in and turned on the light. The worry hit me, and I got really scared. I ran down the hall into the living room. Right on the couch was my little brother. I gave him a big hug, then asked where Chris was. He said he left, but that was all I could get him to say. I called the babysitting company, but they said they hadn't heard anything from him either. They tried calling him, and he didn't answer. They apologized and gave me a refund for the service, but that really didn't make me feel better. Nothing looked to have been stolen, though, and my brother was okay, so after an hour, I just dropped it. I made dinner for us and turned on a show for him to watch before bed. I started cleaning the dishes in the sink, which was facing the front door, when I had a sudden realization. I had to unlock the door when I got home. I never gave Chris keys to the house, and the only way to lock the bolt lock on the door was with the key or from inside the house. I dropped what I was doing and grabbed my little brother, then ran out of the apartment. We sat in my car while I called the police. I saw one of the blinds in my bedroom window move while I was on the phone, and a minute later, Chris ran out of the front of the apartment building and got in his car, driving away. The police came, and later that night, Chris was found in his apartment. He made up a whole story, but it didn't make any sense and didn't fool anyone. It's likely that his plan was to do something to me later that night, then disappear. They found what they described as a travel kit in his car with provisions, survival tools, and blankets. His apartment was also cleaned out, so we'd been planning on doing something like this for a while. This was definitely the most disturbing close call I've ever had. I'm glad it was just that, though, a close call, because it could have been so much more disturbing than it already was if I hadn't gotten out in time.
If you hit that like button, there's a good chance someone else's spine will get tingled by these stories.
I had just gotten home from work at 8. I picked up some food on the way, so I sat down at the table to eat while watching YouTube on my phone. While I was still taking my food out of the bag and setting it on the table, the doorbell rang. It was raining outside, and I had literally gotten home 20 seconds ago, so I was not expecting someone to be at my door so suddenly. I went over to the front door and opened it. A man stood on my porch, looking soaked and cold. "Hi, can I help you?" I said. The man asked me if I'd let him take shelter in my house for the night because he didn't have anywhere else to stay. I felt bad for him, but I wasn't going to let just some random man stay in my house. I apologized and said no. then closed the door. I waited to make sure he left, but after a minute, I hadn't heard any footsteps leaving. I looked out the peephole and saw the man still standing there. He was facing the driveway, looking out into the rain. I thought he was maybe taking shelter on my porch for a bit before going back out, which I guess I didn't mind so long as he left within the next few minutes. I went back to my food and sat down to eat. I had a lot of stuff from work on my mind, so that man on the porch wasn't a big concern of mine. When I finished eating, I put a show on and rested my eyes for a while. 30 or so minutes later, the doorbell rang again. I almost didn't even want to answer, but when I looked out the peephole, I saw a young boy looking to be maybe 13 or 14 years old. I opened the door, and the boy was about to ask me something, but I interrupted him and asked what he was doing out here alone and where his parents were. He paused like he was thinking of a response, but then he just ignored my question and said he was looking for shelter because he didn't have anywhere to stay. There was something wrong, and I knew it the moment those words came out of his mouth. With the boy being so young, though, it was a really strange situation. I told him to stay on the porch for just a minute, then I closed the door and ran to get my phone. I had a feeling that if I told the boy I was calling the police, then he'd run away, so I didn't tell him. I called 911 and let them know that a boy was at my house claiming to be homeless. I made the call quick, then ran back to the door. I opened the door quickly, but standing on my porch were 3 grown men, including the one I'd seen earlier that night. I slammed the door shut immediately as one of the men rushed at me and pushed their body against the door. I locked it just before he turned the handle. I was screaming and crying as I backed away from the door. They were pounding on it and trying to force the handle to turn. After 30 seconds, though, it went quiet. I heard footsteps running away, and then it was over. Just the sound of rain hitting the roof. The police came and took a report from me with descriptions of the men and the boy that I saw. They had a similar incident earlier that week of likely the same group, using the boy as bait to get the homeowner to let them inside. Then the whole group came in and violently robbed them. One of the men was caught a few days later while robbing a store. But as for the boy and the other 2 men, I don't think they were ever found. I work for the janitorial company that cleans office buildings in the city. We have set schedules for each building, and most of the time they request cleanings to be done outside of work hours. So most jobs I did were between 5 p.m. and 7 a.m. It varied depending on the building we were servicing that day. On this night, I was working with my coworker RJ, and we were set to do basic cleaning in a 5-story office building. The floors in this place were really big, mostly filled with rows of cubicles. This job was booked for our whole 8-hour shift, but it wasn't uncommon for it to take longer. We started working at 6. RJ went to the top floor to work his way down, and I started on the bottom floor to work my way up, planning to meet each other on the middle 3rd floor and finish up together. I started by rolling my trash bin over to each cubicle and taking out their trash. Then I cleaned the bathrooms and main offices. After that, I got my cleaning supplies from my cart and started scrubbing the sinks in the bathroom. While I was scrubbing the sinks, though, I heard the front door of the building open. I thought RJ had forgotten something in the van, but a couple of minutes went by and I didn't hear the door open again. Once I finished scrubbing the sinks, I went to the front door and looked outside. The van was off. The doors were locked and it looked empty. I figured I just didn't notice him coming back in, or maybe didn't notice him leaving and the door opening was him actually coming back inside. Whatever I thought, it wasn't a big deal, so I went back to work. After an hour or so, I finished up on the 1st floor and moved to the 2nd. This floor was almost identical to the 1st, except it had a small reception desk in front of the stairs. I started with the trash again, and while I was doing this, I heard another door open. I could tell it was from upstairs, but I didn't know which floor until I heard footsteps. They walked slowly across the floor above me toward the back of the building. I knew it was on the 3rd floor above me, but RJ could not have finished 2 floors in just over an hour. It just wasn't possible. I went to the stairs and onto the 3rd floor to see what he was doing. There was a main door, and behind it was a long hallway filled with closed-in offices. I listened for a second to see if I could pinpoint where he was, but it was silent. "RJ?" I called out. I took a few more steps into the hallway, but I started getting creeped out. I backed out and went to the 4th floor. Right when I opened the door, I saw RJ standing in the middle of the room cleaning with his headphones in. "Hey, were you on the 3rd floor just now?" I asked. He took his headphones out and said, "No," looking at me like he was confused. "Oh, okay. Sorry. I was just starting on my 2nd floor, so I'll see you in a couple hours," I replied. I went back downstairs and splashed some water on my face. I didn't feel that tired, but I knew I had to be imagining these things. At least I thought so. I turned the sink off and patted my face down with a paper towel. Just before I left the bathroom, I heard a door open. It was from the main area on my floor. I waited in the bathroom as whoever was out there started walking around. I stayed for a minute, then opened the bathroom door just barely enough to look into the main room. In the far back was a man. He was facing away from me, walking slowly down the aisles of cubicles. It was so strange because he was just walking, not looking around or doing anything else. "Hey, you okay, man? I don't think you're supposed to be in here," I said, trying to sound nice and not too provoking. The guy turned around and looked at me. He was far away, but I could see emptiness in his eyes, like he was looking straight through me. I waited only a couple of seconds for a response before I quickly walked out of the room. He still didn't move or say anything. I ran up to the 4th floor where RJ was. He was still cleaning and didn't seem to have noticed anything. I convinced him to come down to the van with me, where we called the police and I explained what happened. The police came a few minutes later and searched the building, but came out empty-handed. They reviewed the security footage of that night, though, and saw the man walk inside around the same time that I said I heard the door open. He stayed in the stairwell for a long time, then walked up to the 3rd floor and slowly walked around each room. Then he went to the 2nd floor, where you could see him walk down to the window after my interaction with him. The man left the building as I went to get RJ. His intentions are unknown, but that empty look he gave me and the way he was just walking around were some of the creepiest things I've ever seen. And 4 months later, even with his face clearly shown on the footage, no one has been able to find or identify him.
Thanks for listening. If you want to help build the True Chiller community, like, subscribe, and share.